It is important for the American people to remember the war in Gaza is not a binary issue. However, too often the conversation is binary, when the reality is anything but. So I ask my fellow Americans to help encourage efforts to acknowledge the complexity, the nuance, and the history of the region. Let us all condemn terrorism and violence. Let us all do what we can to prevent the suffering of innocent civilians, and let us condemn anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate of any kind. And let us work to unite our country. I thank you.
Ben Domenech, she just got more people killed, didn't she?
I mean, look, she's been in this job for one day. I mean, effectively, look, when we had the speech from Joe Biden the other night, he obviously was trying to walk a tightrope in terms of what he had to do, and he came out with something that was essentially a very campaign-focused speech as opposed to something that would have been perhaps more personal and more honest. And one of the big questions that emerged from it is, how much of a role in the coming months is Vice President Harris going to have in dictating the policies of the United States versus the current and elected president of the United States? This is not a situation that we've really been in the past. And so that's something that it was a really open question. And I think that what we saw from the vice president last night in her comments about this were, an indication that this administration is going to shift to doing what she wants it to do. That when it speaks, it's going to be her voice and her opinion that matters the most, more than the duly elected president. And that's something that should be very concerning to people. Look, we know the world that Joe Biden and his foreign policy team have created, and it's a world that's chaotic and on fire and very unstable. But we also know that when Joe Biden speaks out on a lot of these issues, he doesn't tend to gravitate toward the far left ridiculousness when it comes to talking about our allies or talking about Israel or anything else. He has his own strains with Bibi Netanyahu, but he also would not be standing up there saying, well, we need to see, that this isn't a binary conflict, when one side, obviously, is run by a terror state, run by a terror government that wants to eradicate Israel and all the Jews that live there, and, is currently, one that is basically back on its heels because of what Israel has done to it, but still has the effective ability to reach out and attack and kill Israeli citizens. And that's something that is unacceptable.
David Harsanyi said it's the very epitome of a binary choice.
Yeah, exactly. Because, look, the binary is simple. Either Hamas has the capability to exist and to kill Israelis, or it doesn't. And Israel, under Netanyahu, is dedicated to the latter. And that's something that we ought to support them in because they are our ally and because they are completely in the moral right in doing this. Now, you can say, oh, well, it's very sad and it's very terrible that in war people who are innocent die, and that's a terrible thing. That's been true of every war ever. But this is also a situation where Israel has to do what it needs to in order to prevent anything like what we saw on the 7th ever happen again. And that's something that, when it came to, Kamala's comments on this, I figured that we at least have a little bit of a break before she did something really stupid when it came to foreign policy or national security. Well, guess what? That break was a day. And I just think that what we're going to see going forward is going to be more of this. And people need to understand how bizarre historically this is. When people talk about this as like a palace coup, they're mostly talking about people, who engineered Joe Biden's exit through their own political behind-the-scenes machinations, namely Nancy Pelosi and other people as well. The donor
Barack Obama. The Obamas were right in the middle of this.
Of course, and that's something that they typically mean. But there's something more significant than that, which is that this isn't just about Joe. It's not just about getting rid of Joe in terms of him being on the ticket. It's about getting rid of Joe in terms of him running the country. And as much as we have problems with Joe, and I certainly have problems with Joe, the truth is that he was elected to be the president. He has the rest of his term to finish out, and he should be in the position of running the country just like every other president is. As much as he is, let me put it this way. I will take an infirm and sleepy Joe Biden, who only needs to can only be awake 6 to 8 hours a day, over Kamala Harris being awake for 24 hours for the rest of this term, and I will be happy with that choice because it's the devil I know.
Right, and I think you raise a point I hadn't even considered until just now. Cedric Richmond, who used to be a Biden advisor in the White House, policy advisor in the White House, took a leave of absence to help run comms for Biden-Harris 24. Now it's just Harris 24. He's still running comms, and he was on CNN and said this a couple of nights ago. Cut 12, Harley.
Let's be clear. There's only one president at a time, and that is going on and been policy for decades. So
now, he said that, Ben Domenech, in the context of let's not assign too much blame for Kamala Harris because Joe Biden's running the country, so we can't hold her accountable for things that Joe Biden does. He's trying to isolate her and protect her from Biden administration decisions. But what you're saying, that's got a whole new meaning to it, right?
Yeah,
Kamala Harris is actually running the country. We only have one president at a time. It's her.
You are completely correct, and this is the thing we need to understand. Nothing is going to happen between now and November, and maybe even after, that Kamala Harris doesn't want to happen coming out of our government. Okay, this is not going to be a situation where Joe Biden and his team are running the country anymore, and that is not acceptable. It's not acceptable. It's one thing for a president to be able to, have a vice president who's running for office and to make decisions, based on understanding that that's something where they don't want to undermine them. Obviously, I mean, there's some decisions that were made in the late 90s, for instance, that Bill Clinton made that probably were designed to help Al Gore to save some of these, decisions for his tenure. That's something that, is historically, understandable. But they were still in charge. They were still making those decisions. Bill Clinton was still making those decisions. Ronald Reagan was still making those decisions. And that's something that we don't have going on right now. Instead, what we have, and I think it's very apparent, is that the government is effectively being run by Kamala Harris. And as soon as Joe Biden got pushed out, as soon as he agreed to sign that bizarre letter, whether he signed it or not, because we don't actually have any image of him signing it, is that moment is the moment when Kamala Harris effectively became the president in all but name. And, I think we can look at Joe Biden and say he's the president in name only from here on out. And that's something that the Democrats are going to play games with. Their media allies are going to play games with it. Anything that comes out of the administration, they're going to say, oh, well, that's a Biden administration decision. And if people have a problem with it, they should, just assign it to Joe and not, put it in any way on at Kamala's feet. But the truth is that what she was doing yesterday, and we saw what happened in front of Union Station. We saw that graffiti. We saw the assaults on park police, all of which, by the way, charges have been dropped, apparently, against the people who did that, which is obscene.
Her statement was absolutely worthless. It was empty rhetoric because nowhere in there was the language of these people need to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
Yeah, where's Kamala the prosecutor when you need her?
Exactly.
I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like that. The thing that people don't understand about this situation, I think, is she appeals to a different base than Joe does because she comes from that base and because her supporters are aligned with that base. And that's something that Joe was able to skirt around and get away with because he comes from an older generation. He doesn't feel the need to appeal to those people. And he's also offered up all these progressive policies that don't require him to, appeal to those people who are burning American flags.
10 seconds. Alex Castellanos said last night on CNN that we've already reached peak Kamala. Do you agree with him, or do you think she's going to get more of a bump?
I think she's going to get a little more bump, but then it's going to be downhill from the convention on. And I think that she makes a great first date, as I say.